MC-21. It's made in Russia. Although it is a new aircraft, it has many features and can control the West. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia's civil aviation projects were either limited or based on outdated designs from the old world. The Irkut MC-21, however, needed a new aircraft to change that, and this is it. As its name suggests, it aims to be the mainline aircraft of the 21st century. Many people thought that the project, which started in 2007, would only be a regional aircraft initiative, similar to the Sukhoi Superjet 100. However, the MC-21's goal was much more ambitious: to enter the battle of the airplanes alongside very good aircraft such as the Airbus A320 and Boeing 737. Moreover, the MC-21's technical characteristics made this goal fully realizable. So it was not just a symbolic goal. What is the most outstanding feature of the MC-21? Its wings. The main structural elements of this aircraft are made of advanced carbon composite materials, making it one of the first narrow-body jets with this feature. In addition to being lighter, these wings can better absorb air. They consume less fuel because they create less drag during flight. In summary, they are cost-effective and environmentally friendly. However, the distinctive features of the MC-21 are not limited to this, because the main goal of the aircraft was not only to be successful in Russia, but also to become popular in international markets. Irkut had special agreements and cooperation with Westerners to develop the MC-21. Pratt & Whitney supplied the PW-1400G engines. Flight control components, cabin systems, and avionics were of the highest quality. The goal was clear. The MC-21 was to be produced for the benefit not only of Russia, but of the whole world. In 2017, the aircraft took off for the first time. It immediately attracted attention thanks to its wide fuselage, modern lines, and low fuel consumption. The cabin design is very special and has attracted everyone's attention. Thanks to its wider fuselage, it offered significantly more interior space than the A320 or 737. In other words, passengers would be able to travel more comfortably with wider seats, more shoulder space, and less claustrophobic conditions. Of course, as with any new aircraft, there were also some setbacks. As geopolitical tensions increased in the 2020s, heavy dependence on Western components became a major problem. Access to key components of the aircraft, especially carbon fiber composite materials and certain electronic systems, was partly denied. America did this because they did not want to involve them in the race. As a result, the MC-21 program slowed down. But Russia refused to give up. Instead, it saw this challenge as an opportunity to change the course of the project and produce the MC-21 entirely domestically. MC-21-310 is the new target. All components used in this version were manufactured in Russia. The PD-14 turbofan, developed by aviation, was introduced to replace Pratt & Whitney engines. This engine was the first fully indigenous commercial engine of the post-Soviet era. Although not as efficient as the PW-1000 series, it is not damaged in long-term use. Composite wings were another achievement of the localized MC-21. To replace imported carbon fibers, Russian engineers and scientists developed a domestic material, UDK. This ushered in a new era of autonomous civil aircraft production in Russia, while also mitigating the effects of sanctions. However, the important question remains: is this aircraft really competitive? The Boeing 737 MAX is on the brink of a crisis. No one has yet been able to solve it. Airbus's A320neo order book is almost full. However, countries looking to move away from Western suppliers are considering the MC-21 as an alternative. Iran, India, some African countries, and even some Middle Eastern airlines want to buy aircraft from the East. Russia wants to fill this gap. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia, motivated by its previous successes, wants to overtake the United States again in the field of airplanes and become number one. After the golden age of Tupolev and Ilyushin airplanes, it has become much more difficult to have a say in international civil aviation again. But Irkut has accepted this challenge. The MC-21, officially renamed the Yakovlev MC-21, is more than just an aircraft. It represents industry, ideology, and possibly the rebirth of a country. The history of this aircraft began in the early 2000s. Russia aimed to produce a narrow-body jet aircraft using its own technology and reduce its dependence on foreign sources. The aim was to compete directly with, and in some cases surpass, the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 aircraft. Everyone thinks they can't do it, but pushing the limits has always been part of Russian engineering. The MC-21's wings conceal its most striking feature. It is the world's first narrow-body aircraft with wings made entirely of carbon fiber composite. In addition to reducing weight, this invention also improved aerodynamic performance and fuel efficiency. This technology was used by Boeing and Airbus only on wide-body aircraft. A revolution may be about to take place in the narrow-body segment, now that Irkut has laid its hands on it. What about the engines? The MC-21 offered both a domestic solution and Western technology. The main feature of this version was the PD-14 engine, which was produced in Russia. This engine, the most sophisticated civilian turbofan produced since the Soviet Union, is of the type that never fails and also matches the power of other competitors' engines. In addition, Russian companies began to supply all the aircraft's air conditioning, landing gear, electrical systems, and cabin interiors. In addition to establishing the MC-21's independence from the West, these initiatives demonstrated the progress made by Russia's domestic aviation industry. Test flights continued steadily. By the end of 2022, the modified MC-21-310 had successfully completed the first ground tests and took off. Test flights were carried out in Irkutsk, Zhukovsky, and Kazan in 2023 and 2024. Russian aviation authorities closely monitored and scrutinized each flight and adjusted them to meet airworthiness requirements. At first, geared turbofan engines manufactured by Pratt & Whitney, PW1400G, were used. But as with the Sukhoi Superjet 100, Russia wanted to eliminate its foreign dependence. As a result, United Engine Corporation's fully domestic PD-14 engine was built and put up for sale for use. The MC-21 and other new Russian civil aircraft would be powered by this engine. The A320neo and 737 MAX families were direct competitors of the MC-21 with a capacity of 163, 211 passengers. However, it stood out with its more spacious cabin. It had a more modern design concept. Larger windows, wider seats, and improved air pressure were appreciated by passengers. The cabin width of 7 meters of the Airbus. A320 was clearly lower than the 1-meter cabin width of the MC-21, but these technological developments were inextricably linked to geopolitical realities. The MC-21 relied on Western suppliers for many of its parts. Russia was dependent on American and European goods, especially for electronics and composite materials. In these years, the economic crisis was on the brink, but the whole world and the universe. At this point, the story of the MC-21 turned from a technical endeavor into a geopolitical conflict. As a result of the sanctions imposed on Russia in 2022, many Western companies withdrew from the supply chain. Important parts such as avionics, landing gear components, cabin equipment, and resins used in composite wings were no longer available. This directly affected the future of the MC-21. However, Russian engineers did not give up. Irkut and United Aircraft Corporation, UAC, immediately began a full-scale process of import substitution, as in the SSJ-NU project. This will only apply to aircraft in Russia. It launched a new version, the MC-21-310, and in many ways brought about a rebirth. However, international certification was still a major unknown. Since technical cooperation with organizations such as the FAA and EASA was suspended, it became more difficult for the MC-21 to obtain official approval in Western markets. This reduced the international potential of the aircraft. However, Russia had other plans for the West. The new jet attracted the interest of many countries in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Potential common routes where the MC-21 could compete with regional counterparts such as the C-919 were made possible by strategic cooperation with China. There have also been discussions with Venezuela, India, and Iran, which shows that if everyone is coming to us, we are successful, and the demand is increasing, we have to do more. But this story was much more than an airplane. Because the MC-21 was much more than an engineering marvel or a technical product. It represented Russia's aspirations to carry the Soviet industrial heritage into the future, challenge Western aviation dominance, and achieve technological independence. Each test flight was as much a source of pride for the country as it was an engineering achievement. Every engine thrust, landing gear deployment, and wing movement was a way for Russia to say, we can do this too. In addition to the government, the MC-21 was also in demand by Russia's major airline companies. This aircraft was ordered by most everyone. With this aircraft, large countries could operate frequent and cheap flights, and more efficient domestic routes could be established. It is interesting to note that the MC-21 was not only produced for domestic markets. Due to its spacious cabin and cheap operating costs, it was also suitable for Europe's low-cost carrier model. If political conditions permit, it could theoretically be a good alternative for airlines such as Ryanair or Wizz Air. There has also been a noticeable change in the manufacturing process itself. Advanced technologies such as 3D printing and advanced composites have been adopted, Soviet-era factories have been modernized, and digital production systems have been integrated. The foundation of the projects has been laid, which means that Russia is now very technologically advanced. This was not the case in the past, but there was still a challenging question. Will the MC-21 remain an exciting but unfinished chapter in the history of Russian aviation, or will it really gain a permanent place in international aviation? This question is not only about the MC-21, but about the future of Russia in civil aviation. And this aircraft remains the sky-imprisoned hero of a story that is still being written. The first fully production-ready MC-21 310 aircraft had already begun to roll off the assembly line by 2025. This aircraft was now preparing for its first commercial flights with its new engines, fully indigenous avionics, and sophisticated composite fuselage. Meanwhile, Irkut continued to improve its cabin experience. Larger cabin diameter, even in the 3 layout of the 737 and A320. In addition, other competitors were not very comfortable. This aircraft was more comfortable. Flexible configurations could be implemented by airlines. The MC-21 was a truly modern passenger jet thanks to its digital control systems, spacious overhead compartments, quiet cabins, and modern LED lighting. The initial commercial objective of the aircraft was to fully cover the Russian domestic market before expanding regionally. The MC-21 is not only a technical solution, but also a diplomatic upgrade, as evidenced by negotiations with countries such as Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, India, and even Vietnam. This is because engineering is only one aspect of modern aviation. Other aspects include politics, economics, and international relations. Russia's ability to produce high technology and sustain it over time will depend on the success of the MC-21. Because in the aviation industry, it is very difficult, and in some places, not enough to design and operate an aircraft. You also need to certify it, create a reliable supply chain, help operators, and maintain it for decades. Therefore, the last and most difficult question is whether the MC-21 will really gain a permanent place in the sky, or whether it will remain another hopeful but unrealized dream of Russian aviation. And here we come to the last, but the most difficult question. Will the MC-21 really take a permanent place in the skies, or will it become another promising but unfinished project of Russian aviation?